Ah, well, glory be and mercy me, we've done it yet again. Here we are on the regular walk. Today, one of my new Patreons asked me a question and wants me to speak on Sam Harris and the New Atheist movement, especially as it relates to Islamophobia and our connection to the Muslim world. And I haven't spoken about Sam Harris in quite some time, or the New Atheists in quite some time, and it's something that I experienced and I went through, and so what the hey, let's have a good conversation. I hope that this is what you're looking for, friend. So, Sam Harris and the New Atheists arose amidst a 9/11 America. They were around, of course, before 9/11, but really gained prominence post 9/11. Sam Harris especially, with his work Letter to a Christian Nation. And of course the New Atheists being Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett to a degree, although Dennett has less notoriety and likely more credibility than the others. But the focus of this will be more on Harris. Because Harris is an interesting figure in the New Atheists. Who can be given lots of credibility and lots of credit for standing up against the Christian right, the Christian fundamentalists that exist within their own society and the evangelicals that exist within the society. You can give them more credit and credibility than the Christian left, who has essentially ceded authority and ceded ground to the Christian right, has refused to actually grow a backbone and stand up against these, what Chris Hedges calls Christian fascists. So you at least have to grant people like Harris and the New Atheists this reality, which is that they stood up against the Christian evangelicals to the degree that it mattered, because ultimately Christian evangelicals with George W. Bush were able to cede power, and we all know how that has gone. And there's an interesting thing that occurred with Sam Harris especially within the framework of Islamophobia. He gets pegged, along with people like Bill Maher and the like, as being an Islamophobe. And that is fundamentally true. You can go read Letter to a Christian Nation and see the most overtly racist, obviously stereotypical, blatantly absurdist, cartoonish depictions of Muslims that exist, perhaps in all of English literature, come out of the writings of Sam Harris, saying crazed and absurd things like Muslim mothers celebrate when their children blow themselves up with suicide bombs. This kind of removal of base emotional humanity from Muslims that Harris does. And it is done explicitly, because while Harris presents himself as a rational, reasonable, he speaks very much like this all of the time and doesn't really rise up and raise his voice in passion or anger. But he is primarily motivated through fear. That 9/11 obviously shook him as a human being. And instead of taking a critical eye to his own culture and the sins of his own culture, the sins that led to the event of 9/11, he has decided to take a more chauvinist view, let's say, and say of the countries that his own nation invades, we are also allowed to critique your culture. This is the Western chauvinist perspective, that we have the best culture, obviously we have the best culture, and so we are allowed and permitted to critique other cultures, including the ones we invade. This was Sam Harris 101, that while we were invading Iraq and Afghanistan, while we were invading the Middle East and destroying those people and destroying those populations, men like Harris genuinely believed that he was permitted to critique those cultures during these periods of duress and war, famously deriding the Middle East for its suicide bombing tactics. Because bombing people with suicide vests is intrinsically worse than dropping bombs on them. I'm not sure how that's the case, but Harris seems convinced of it. Where Harris steps into overt, egregious, clear, bigoted hatred is on the subject of torture. Harris famously stood up and said that torture is good, that you can justify torture, giving us the famous ticking time bomb scenario. Never mind that the ticking time bomb scenario, which was the inspiration for shows like 24 during this period of time, never mind that the United States military itself explicitly stated that there's no such thing as the ticking time bomb scenario, but we are asking an Islamophobe and a bigot to live in reality, so you have to grant some credence. This incoherence, which was put forward by Harris, that we can justify the use of torture, which was being widely used during the 9/11 Bush administration, we can justify it because it can prevent further atrocities. This, of course, sidesteps completely any idea that torture is wrong because it proves itself as wrong, right? There are a few acts in the world that are self-condemning, that the act of torture, no matter how hard you justify it to yourself, is likely not justified to the person that you are torturing. That the person you are torturing likely is not going to see your point of view. And it is likely going to confirm what they were suspicious of in the first place, which is that you are evil and acting in evil ways. And how do they know that you are evil and acting in evil ways? Because you torture people. And why do you torture people? Because you don't consider them or their perspective to be justified or justifiable. Because you're a bigot or an Islamophobe, if you prefer. This conversation of torture was well debated and well fleshed out between Harris and Chris Hedges. And Harris has never recanted from the position. He has never repented for his position, and near as I can tell, still maintains the idea that torturing Muslims in a ticking time bomb scenario is completely legitimate. And so this begins to raise the interesting question, something I've been dwelling on a lot recently. Why is it that a man like Harris was put in front of us? Why is it that he has been given such a prominent focus that, while it has declined in recent years, over that period of time, he was a central figure, showing up on Joe Rogan's podcast, Bill Maher's show regularly. A regular guest in the mainstream media was Sam Harris. Well, this is because what he was espousing was convenient for the capitalist death cult at the time. That the capitalist death cult, post 9/11, used the mass hysteria that was whipped up in the public in order to focus their attention into war. And it needed apologists to stand up and create excuses for why the actions of the death cult were warranted, even in the face of basic moral reason or basic compassion and empathy. When people asked of George W. Bush, why do they hate us? George Bush answered with, they hate us for our freedoms. conveniently ignoring that we had been invading and destroying their lands for decades, conveniently ignoring that the leaders all throughout the Middle East had explicitly stated the reasons why they disliked the American empire, had explicitly given a laundry list of rationales. And instead of the media, the mouthpiece of the capitalist death cult, coming out and saying, oh wait, this is what the enemies have been saying. This is what these people have been saying. We should analyze this and see if there's any credence to what they say. We should verify the veracity of their statements. Instead of that, they put in front of us a Western chauvinist, Islamophobic bigot who argued in favor of torture in order to help justify the torture regime of the Bush administration. And they were able to do this, and they were able to popularize Harris's perspective simply because of the overwhelming force that they have. They have done a similar thing with Jordan Peterson in recent years. It is visible and is yet another reason why, as I say all the time on this channel, billionaires are dangerous. Even a single billionaire is dangerous because they can make people popular and famous simply by putting them in front of you over and over and over and over again. And that their talking points become common and normalized, not because of the force of their truth, but simply through repetition. Simply because they're stated so often. Over and over and over, you hear the subjects, you hear the slogans, you hear the lines, and you hear it so often, and so many times you are directed towards it, that you begin to assume that they must be telling the truth to a certain degree. You begin to accept that men like Harris, well, he must be correct about what he's saying. I see him so often, and I see him all over the place. And because humans are incredibly social creatures, we begin to assume their credibility because we assume that other people assume their credibility. Well, I see him so often, I see him all over the place, so lots of other people must be buying into this idea. Lots of other people must be believing what's being said, and I don't want to be in the out group. I'm a human after all. I want to be part of the common knowledge and the common thinking. I don't want to be excluded. And so I'll simply allow this Western chauvinist, Islamophobic bigot to exist within the discourse without challenge. We have men like Chris Hedges who brought Harris back down to the earth to thank for being willing to be outed by the group. Remember, Hedges' position on the Iraq War lost him a job at the New York Times. He came out against the war and they threw him out of the newspaper. He was booed off of a stage when he gave a commencement address in front of, I believe it was Harvard University, when he came out against the Iraq War. They cut his mic and refused to allow him to speak. That is what happens when you stand up against what is perceived to be the common position. And I say perceived to be because it only becomes the common position, not because of righteousness or the truth of the position. I mean, for God's sakes, Harris still defends torture against Muslims, of course, but not because of the truth of that position, but because of the repetition, because you hear it so often that it becomes the truth. Incidentally, this is a classic strategy of the Nazis. I'm not saying Harris is a Nazi, I'm just saying it's interesting that he is part of a tactic that is used by Nazis. That's all. So, I think that this is the end of the video. I do have more to say about Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins and Dennett and all of those kinds of people. And if you want to talk to me more about those kinds of things, you can come into my live stream. 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every weekday. Come on in, have a good conversation with me. We are building a solidarity movement of rebellion against the capitalist death cult, which will gladly put Western chauvinist Islamophobic bigots in front of you and try to convince you that torture is fine as long as they're Muslims that we bomb. And we are totally allowed to critique them as we plunge them into desperation and despair, because obviously a people who are fighting back in a war are the same as a peaceful people who are not being bombed. Clearly. And the people who are doing the bombing completely have the moral ability to actually critique the culture that they're bombing, right? Obviously. Alright guys, like, share, subscribe, hit all the bells, hit all the whistles. I have a Patreon down below. Please consider donating. We are a growing movement, swiftly growing, soon to overtake all things, I'm sure of it. Always remember, you are a quantum being, living in quantum energy. These guys are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to make you forget about it. Don't let them. Rebel, revolt, repent. Good luck. We're gonna need it.